My name is Richard Ferrer, and I can say I am cloud hired.
That yes, come and join and get cloud hired. I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
Hey, Go Cloud Architect family, I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired, guys.
So I'll just say I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired thanks to Go Cloud Architects.
It worked for me, and now I'm cloud hired. Because of Google Architect program, I am cloud hired. See!
I am cloud hired. Thank you, Mike and the GlowCloud team.
Hi, everyone. It's Mike Gibbs and Alonzo Coleman. We're here from Go Cloud Careers to truly try and help you with your career. Maybe you've got questions on what type of a technology career you're looking for. Maybe you would like to know actually how to get there. Maybe have a roadmap. Maybe you're not sure what career is right for you. Wondering if you're learning the right things versus not learning the right things. That's why we're here. We're here to help you get to your goals. And we'd like to come online, me and at least someone from my team, at least once a week to help you get there. Because I remember when I started my tech career 25 years ago, nearly everyone that gave me advice, well, they weren't working in tech, so I don't know why they were giving me advice, but it was all the wrong advice. And I see people go every day and spend years working hard to learn things on their own. And they find out they've learned all the right skills for somebody else's career. And I'm not saying they're not good skills. But if you want to fly an airplane, for example, and you've got skills as a lawyer, probably not going to help you better be an airplane pilot. Still a good skill, just totally unrelated. And I see people do it every day. So that's why we're here. So if you want to become a cloud architect or a solutions architect, ask us how. You want to become an enterprise architect? Ask us how. You want to know what it's like to be a DevOps engineer or a network engineer or something like that, and you want to know how to get there? Ask us how. Because that's what we do. I've been an architect now for about 25 years in technology, network architect, enterprise architect, business architect, you name it, all I've done it. And I've spent more than 2 decades helping people get hired. I am joined here by Alonzo Coleman. Alonzo is a cloud architect, and he actually works with us as well. He's our chief marketing officer, but he does a lot of architecture himself. And he also, like me, hates to see people go down the wrong direction. And he can talk a lot more about that if he desires to at some point. And he just wants to help people get hired. And even now, I just got somebody hired yesterday, they told me, in Eastern Europe, which makes me happy. So anything we can do to help you in your career, we're so happy to be here. So if there's any questions, just let us know.
We'd definitely love to answer them. Let's take a look and see what we may have.
And actually, before we get there, my team is reminding me that we've got some free resources you can use. So we have a how to become a cloud architect and a how to become an enterprise architect, I believe, and a how to become a AI architect documents and ebooks on this completely free in the description of this video. Tomorrow, we'll be doing a webinar on how to get your first cloud architect job. We'll go over the role, talk about everything we do and all the skills that you actually need to get there. And it'll be free. And then after that, you can join us on Zoom, ask any career questions you desire, and we're happy to make that happen as well. And we've got documents on various things in your technology career, how to earn more, how to interview better, and they're all free in the description of this video.
From Tayab, Mike, why most Why most companies have a requirement of country nationality, even though they are offering remote jobs? I'm from Pakistan.
It's a really great question, and there's a lot of reasons for this. So let's talk about what some of those reasons are. One is their legal reasons. There are times where you just cannot do business with a country because maybe there's sanctions or there's an embargo of some type. And that affects the people that are living in these embargo type countries quite negatively. But that's one of the reasons employers are just not legally allowed to. The other thing that people typically look at is, remote's good, but sometimes you got to get people together. And this is pretty important. So they want to know that people can actually be able to meet and get together. So for example, if you have some people that are in Pakistan and you have a manager that lives out in Pakistan, they can meet the people that are actually working there or go see them a little more easily and do team building things to try to keep everybody connected. So that's really another one of the reasons it's actually there. And the third is, where would you be allowed to travel to? Because if we have to travel to certain places, not everybody on every passport is allowed to travel to different places. So companies for remote work could also be concerned about where they may need you to actually work. For example, on a US passport, it's pretty easy to go anywhere, but there's some countries that it's just not so easy. And that is going to be essential, especially if it's a remote job where you're going to have to come into contact with people and work with people and build relationships like an architect. Any other thoughts here? I mean, those embargo countries we talked about, that's possible. That's the other possibility too. But let me turn this to you, Alonso.
Yeah, I definitely, when I think about, say, for instance, government cloud architecture requirements, the Department of Defense architectural framework requires people to pass certain security protocols. And if you're not, unfortunately, if you are on that list of people that we may not be as friendly with as we would like, those are the type of citizenships that may not qualify for those particular roles. Now, I believe, despite where you are, what nationality you are, what country you hail from, as architects, we are unified for our desire to create great architectural solutions, no matter what we look like, culture, or anything else. And that's the tie that binds. However, from a governmental perspective, that may not be the case. So unfortunately, with those particular countries, I won't go down that list, but that may inhibit you from being qualified to take that role. Diggleman, I was thinking about taking a popular communications course to increase my value as an architect. Is this a good investment, and what would you recommend?
So taking communications classes, absolutely. Dingleman, I wish you actually came to our classes and finished our thing, because you would actually be doing some of this work. But that's neither here nor there. You did get a good job at that, one of the largest tech companies in the world. So I'm totally happy you're there as a security engineer. Yes, I think a communications class for $1,000, $2,000, even $5,000 is a well worth an investment. And I've taken communications classes that are actually about $3,800. But by the time you're done traveling, it's always a $5,000 thing. So yeah, and if you can find a good course and it's taught by someone that knows what they're doing, that's coached other executives, I think $1,000 for something like that is honestly nothing, and it could provide so much business value. Let's talk, Alonso. Why don't you talk about errors with regards to miscommunication and talk about what happens when people don't communicate well, the kind of conflict that causes, and maybe bring that to the productivity levels of employees, and any other things you want to talk about. But I know those three, you'd really hit on hard.
Yeah, absolutely. Wars have started by miscommunication. And there's more other facets to consider when you're talking about communication. You're talking about written, oral, verbal, nonverbal, and being able to communicate exactly what you want when you want to the right audience who is receptive to particular nuances in how they choose to communicate. There's a lot more that just goes into, by just opening your mouth. So say, for instance, if you are talking with CEOs, you need to understand what their value, what's the value prop that's going to keep them invested in you, focused on you. What's the value prop for a chief financial, chief marketing, chief information, chief security? You have to understand what their takeaway or what the takeaway that they want to have from you. So understanding throughout the entire life cycle of a particular architectural process, you need to know how to talk to your stakeholders. What's important to them? How do they want to communicate? In what frequency do they want to communicate? What are their preferred vehicles of talking? Some of them may want to text once a week or once a month. Other people might want an entire breakdown of an executive summary every step of the way. So it's very important for you to understand your audience first, so that you can understand how best to communicate and what's important to them to facilitate great solutions, great value, and great overall understanding from a governance perspective. Let's take in consideration the architectural development method from TOGAF. There are a lot of different building blocks that talk about everyone has to understand how to communicate the same way, so that there's not going to be any misconstrued misalignments or lack of understanding about what this architectural framework or what the overall goals of this particular project is supposed to do. So taking it all back, Diggleman, really invest in your communication, invest in your communication style, invest in understanding how to facilitate the best style and the best vehicles of communication to all of your audience, and you're going to be in a great space that will leverage and uplift your career to definitely new heights. Dennis, no recruiters are reaching out to me on LinkedIn. What do you think I'm doing wrong on my end?
Hi, Dennis. So I get to know you, and I think a lot of you. So the first thing is I would be sure that I was ready to be an architect before I was looking for recruiters to reach out to me for architecture jobs. So there is that. And keep that in the back of your mind. I think 6 months or so would potentially be appropriate. When I look at your LinkedIn profile, here's what I see. For the last 2 jobs you've had, or 3 jobs, there's literally nothing in there whatsoever. And then everything else that you have there is hardcore engineering. So there's nothing about your resume that would get somebody to reach out to me for an architect job. I would see it and I'd look at it and I'd say, engineer. But the last 3 jobs, why is there nothing there? And then I'd be concerned about your attention to detail as well. Now I know you, and that's not it. I know that for a fact that's not you. But that's what I see when I look out there. So I think I would hone those architect skills to the point where you understand the entire picture and where all these pieces and parts put together. And then not only will you be able to get a resume training, which is actually in the program, after you've redone enough of the course where we know you're going to get hired, but you'll be able to turn it in and get feedback on it. And that's there. But when I look at it right now, I see engineering to a degree, and even that's not fleshed out enough. And that's really where I see the real challenge there. I've not seen the content you're actually creating out there. So what's going to happen is if you create great content, what happens is people see you as a leader, and then they go look at you. And when they look and they see last 3 jobs, there's nothing there other than they say remote or which place the country they're located in the city. And then the only thing they go back after that is they see an engineering thing where they're talking about, creating microservices, which is engineering and not architecture, for example, performing code reviews, again, engineering, not architecture, maintaining applications in React and Node.js applications, again, that's engineering, not architecture. So that's the only thing I would see. So what I would do is if you had content and I saw this, it would make me see you as either a software engineer or a DevOps engineer, which is not an architect. So I think you need to make it good. I think you need to flesh that out as soon as you know exactly what we do. And that way, if you talk about responding to an RFI, RFP, or RFQ, when the interviews you and they're going to see if they're going to bring you in. And if they see you and bring you in an interview, but you're not familiar with the RFP process or what it takes to lead an RFP, that's when the employers terminate the interview right then and there. So we can't put things that are there. And the second thing is what I look at on resumes, and I can tell when someone doesn't understand anything on the resume or they're not ready for the job when they write it themselves. It's going to look like this. They're going to say, created a high security system using encryption and IAM. And when I see that, it shows me that the person doesn't know that, say, the big picture is they're creating a high security storage environment. And what goes into that? Well, first, it's going to be good perimeter security, for example, with firewalls for anything that could come in, maybe some IDS, IPS system. Then there's some other network security systems that are going to be there. And there's going to be SIEM strategies to make sure you know when you're broken into before you're broken into. And then there's going to be some data loss prevention technologies that you're going to be needing to. Maybe you're checking some kind of a hash on the files to make sure that the files haven't changed along the way. What type of identity systems does that match into? And then what type of encryption strategies, both while it's in flight and then stored? That's the whole thing. And when you're at that point where you know it, you can actually talk about it. So that's what we're looking for, Dennis. So I personally know you, and I think you're very smart, and I actually like you a lot. But I don't think in the last 3 to 4 weeks I've given you enough of what you need to become an architect.
And if I might add, Dennis, as well, definitely you hail from one of my favorite places in the entire world. And I also have to say, wonderful personality. Your positivity is infectious, but also understand that your resume and more importantly, your LinkedIn is your particular brand ambassador for who you are. If you want someone to know who you are and what you do and how you add value, it has to reflect in that LinkedIn profile. It has to share those details, because believe it or not, a lot of LinkedIn recruiters, primary, secondary, maybe even tertiary level recruiters are always surfing LinkedIn for qualified candidates. And if you don't have what they're looking for, or rather to the point, you don't have what is required on your LinkedIn to represent you as a qualified, competent, and capable cloud architect, they will pass you by. So we want to make sure that when you're ready for the Grand Prix, that your race car is ready to go. You've got a great pit crew. You've got everything that you need to be successful, translating to you have the competency, capability, you're able to have the communication, your ability to showcase value and how you're able to leverage efficiency, optimization, be able to rally the troops, be able to, even if you don't have the authority over the troops, and a lot of other things, so that they know that you will be a strong candidate for a position. So gear yourself up, showcase what you know, showcase what you're becoming, and be able to make sure that's reflected in your brand and in your LinkedIn profile.
Yeah.
Drifting, can you help me? I'm confused. I've heard you and David Linthicum say architects don't touch the technology. If you're not touching the technology, what are you doing? Great question.
You know, that is a really great question, and I'm going to go through it. And, you know, what we do is nothing like people see in an exam. We're not touching the technology. That's administration. And the reality is engineering, and I love engineers, is not necessarily the best preparation for this either. What we do is a lot more like management and strategy consultants, which is typically a business architect. So let's say the client says, we're interested in moving to the cloud. Well, they want to go to the cloud. Why do they want to go to the cloud? So the first thing we need to do is go speak to those clients' executives and ask them, where do you want to take your business? What are your goals for your business? What do you need to do right now? Where do you want to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and 20 years from now? And if you're an architect like me on this kind of senior work, you're going to have to sign a lot of non-disclosure agreements, because that's proprietary information that can't go out. So first you need to find that. Now, and then find out the initiative, and is cloud even the right thing or not? And if it's cloud, you know, should we build them a private cloud with Nutanix or OpenStack? Should we put a percentage in AWS and Azure? Should they do this on GCP and backup? Should they do disaster recovery for the cloud? We even need to know what we are even trying to do. So first we need that. Now, the next thing we need to do, drifting tangerines, is we have to understand how the business operates. See, if we don't understand how the business operates, and then we put in technology that changes the way the workers do their jobs, we can really damage a business. And sadly, in 70% of all architectures, the businesses actually get damaged. They get no benefit, and they use resources for this. And in many cases, the systems get broken because the technology doesn't support the way the employees needed it to be or were before the technology changes. So then that part of this is really understanding that organization. what type of an operating model should that organization actually use? Do they need a lot of integration or low integration based upon their systems and their people and their data sharing? So we've got to understand that. We have to understand, say, how sales occurs and what system sales touches along the way. What a marketing team, if they're doing something, what's going on with that? What systems do they use? And how does that send data from plane A to plane B? Because we don't know the flow. We can't move it. And this is going to occur. Okay, now let's look at your data. Now, when you're going to the cloud, what I see is you want to do some AI. So is your data good enough for you to do AI? Do we have the data? Is the data quality? Do we need to cleanse that data with some data hygiene? What kind of mapping and reduction is there? And we need to bring in a team of people that are going to really analyze those data needs. And then on next, we got to go look at, okay, your security needs. What are they going to be? And there, what we have to do is we have to quantify the risks for the organization from a financial perspective and look at their exposure and look at the vulnerabilities they have that are going on with their systems, and looking at the mitigation attempts they have with their systems and their systems in compliant with any regulation. For example, healthcare in the US, GDPR for privacy standards in Europe. So we got to go focus on that and make sure look at what they have. We've got to baseline all this technology and more technologies, their networking, their security, all of it. So when we baseline what they have and we understand how it's all connected, then we can think about, what's optimal, what's suboptimal. And then we can start thinking about making a technology recommendation. And that technology recommendation is not going to be something like in a book, oh, you just use all AWS stuff or all Azure stuff. It's not going to look anything like this. We're going to have tens and 50 or hundreds of vendors that have different equipment that needs to go to the cloud, potentially. And they're all going to be supported by different people, and they all have different integration points. So now we have to understand all of that and map that out so we can now create a new strategy. Now we've got a new technology strategy, and now we need to go both ask the stakeholders and the client and the business. These are people maybe that run business units. They're people on the C-suite. They're people that have a big stake in the company. Is this technology architecture going to impact your side of the business correctly? And what you'll find out is what you're going to do is going to help the marketing department great, but hurt the engineering department. So you're going to spend 3 to 6 months going from stakeholder to stakeholder and trying to negotiate between them in order to make sure that you've got the best systems that are going to make compromises so the business can get to its goal. And this is before we even think about anybody building it. Then we need to assess the organization, and we need to assess their capacity and their people. Do the people have the skills? If the people don't have the skills, can we retrain them? Are they going to be the people that want to work? If not, do we need to hire a contractor? Do we need to hire new employees? And that kind of assessment is going to take a lot of work and a lot of planning. So when we finally get to that point, we need to go work with the organization and set up a governance structure. So they've got people that are going to be governing the implementation, because architects don't touch the technology. We're going to be focused on another architecture. So that's actually going to mean we're going to need some executive sponsorship, because if the executives don't use it, the technology project will fail and the employees won't use it. And in this process, who's going to be the lead, and maybe a VP or a director or a service delivery executive actually comes in to actually, manage the implementation, and then some project managers are hired for the implementation, and then the engineers need to build this thing. So, that's after we leave and after we're done, but everything prior to bringing in that team, we do. We even have to set up a structure for change control. We're dealing with when customers want to know what's going to happen, an RFI, like a request for information, RFP, a request for proposal, RFQ, request for quotes or pricing. We're going to be writing a lot of documents. We're going to be attending a lot of meetings, and we're going to be leading large teams. So I hope I gave you that, and I hope it kind of hits you with something. That everything I said right now, for the most part, is non-technical. Now, we still have to have the technical underpinnings. For example, we need to know exactly what the systems are looking at. And if we know, for example, the various types of networking and how the various types of networking pieces fit together and design patterns for them, we know how to structure, say, the foundation. But that's just networking the piece. But if we don't understand the network, for example, again, things are going to break apart when we move them. So for the architect, learning to code does not help us at all, because that's getting to that thing that's directly in front of you. For the architect, learning how the network works, learning how the data center works, learning how the storage systems work, learning how the databases do their thing, learning, how would you create a generative AI system and what type of systems would you need along the way? We can't get down into the weeds of these things. So that's really what we're doing. And I didn't talk about all the presentations we're doing and all the workshops and all the executive briefings, and we're typically entertaining clients, and that could take hours here all the time. So there's so many other wonderful things we do. And I will say that I've been an architect now for 25 years. I spent 3 horrible, painful months in engineering, and I have lots of respect for engineers, but I was an engineer. I was like, Mike, come in at 3 o'clock and go change this router code. Mike, this thing's broken and nobody else can fix it. You fix it. And I was there 15, 20 hours a day. It was terrible. And then I moved into architecture, and it was this nice, wonderful job that I've loved for 2.5 decades. But those engineers that can do it, we owe them a big debt of gratitude because they work really hard. Anything for you, Alonzo, on this?
You'd be surprised that, number one, just because we are in tech doesn't mean that we have to be technical. Okay. So we have to understand the tech, what it is, what it does, when we would use it, but we are not getting on the command line to regenerate script, test code, any of those things. Because at the end of the day, we're all in business, or rather we're hired to create solutions for leadership who wants to make money. Okay. We don't make money until we have to build relationships with other people with money. That requires time, that requires communication, building relationships, and helping them to understand on their terms, which we were just previously talked about, communication, how this technology yields value, business value, not only for ourselves, but for the company as well. So that requires due diligence and understanding the environment, how it yields all of these wonderful benefits so that they can be the best of class in their industry. They can increase their market share. They can be better customers, create better customer service experiences, which would incur more business from new and existing customers. These are the things that they need to understand as to how tech will get them to that space. So, as Mike illustrated, we're going to be in lots of meetings, and I do mean lots of meetings. We need to, they need to understand what's going on, the who, what, where, when, and why. And from the to basically, like I said, understand the why, but move it from the as is. What is it currently doing? How is it doing it? Is it on-prem or is it in the cloud? Is it a little bit of both? And be able to transition that using resources and people and time and places to get them to the space where they want it to be. Much like you're moving from one state to the next, what does that include? Is this going to be, and you look at it from a logical and physical standpoint, we have moving trucks. We have all the things we need to move it from one location to the next, preferably Florida. And from a logical standpoint, you're moving all of your utilities. You don't have to move the kitchen sink or the cable or anything else, but logically speaking, you are digitizing your accounts to provide services in another location, same premise. So understand that this takes communication and understanding the value by picking the right utilities and everything else to get you from one place to the next. I hope it makes sense because I know we gave a lot of information. From Tamio. Here in France, there are little junior cloud architect job opportunities, Mike, and most cloud architect jobs require at least 3 to 5 years of experience. I am planning to, okay, let's take a look at that first one.
So let's take a look at the first one. There in France, as well as the entire world, there are no junior any jobs. I'm going to make this clear. There's no junior any jobs, no junior DevOps jobs, no junior architect jobs. And I'm also going to tell you that I've never had anybody ever get a junior job in my entire life that I've worked with. And I can give you examples in every country in the world and all over Europe of people that have been hired with absolutely no cloud architect experience. If I want someone to be my receptionist, I look for 5 years experience, and I'm not joking. If you want to hire a front desk worker in a hotel, they want 5 years working. The first tech job I wanted, they wanted 15 years working. I had none. And I can give you examples of people from all over the world. The key is they want someone that can actually do the job. And the problem is it's near impossible to actually find an architect. And I'll tell you why it's nearly impossible to find an architect. Because either people go and do engineering like DevOps, which has zero to do with architecture, and which is usually the problem, it's the wrong set of skills, or the people don't know the business, which is part of the architect job, or the people know how to build the technology, but they don't know how to design the technology. And I've interviewed about 6,000 people, and I found less than 50 that I could potentially hire. And the reason I say this about certifications, I interviewed well over 1,000 AWS certified people. None of them even knew what cloud computing was, other than that. And they didn't realize it was just renting space in someone else's network in a data center. I mean, that was kind of scary to me. Almost none understood the concept of routing or sending your traffic from point A to point B. None of them knew how to design anything. They did have good skills in the names of these AWS services and how to go configure them. But I asked them, how would you design something? They had no concept, because that's the architect job. If, and I see the second half, does you spend 3 or 4 years doing DevOps, that's fine. Doing DevOps is fine if that's your end goal career. But don't think it's going to get you anywhere closer to a cloud architecture. Because while you're setting up and dealing with infrastructure as code, or you're setting up a Kubernetes cluster, or you're dealing with a CI/CD pipeline, automated code tools, that's what you're going to learn. And what you won't have any knowledge in, and this is the reason I'm saying it, and I'm going to tell you why I know this from experience. I've got lots of people that have been DevOps engineers and cloud engineers for a decade or more that I've had to retrain before I could get them hired as an architect. And you're going to have really great hands-on skills, but that's wonderful. And then somebody's going to ask you, how would you design the demilitarized zone for a mission-critical web application? And you won't know where to begin. Or someone's going to ask you about the organization's cost of capital and how you would leverage that information to determine whether they should use a Nutanix or OpenStack cloud versus AWS or Azure, and you won't know. And they're going to ask you, how would you respond to an RFP? And you're not going to know. And they're going to ask you, what are the key performance indicators that you're typically trying to meet, and how have you met or exceed them with your architectures? And you're not going to know. And that's going to be the problem that we typically see. I love DevOps engineers. They are awesome. But learning DevOps engineering will give you no more benefit to learning cloud architecture than being a flight attendant on an airplane and thinking that's going to get you to be the pilot. Sure, you'll have lots of time on airplanes, but it's just a very different job. So what I think you need to do is determine what you really want. And that can be whatever it is, and then get the right training and go. You know, just today, somebody in Eastern Europe got hired. But, you know, I look at Noah Parker, and I mention him because he was a social worker. And I come from healthcare. That was my first job. And it kind of hit me. And, 9 months later, he's hired at a head as a solution architect. And when I look at, and we're not talking about rinky-dink companies, when I look at Al Legister, his last job was a sales rep for Kimberly-Clark's Consumer Products Group, like tissues, those kind of things. And the next thing I know, we train him, and then he's actually working at Deloitte as a senior architect as his first job. And when I look at Wallace Agana, he was a sales rep also. And he left our program hired by JP Morgan Chase in England as an enterprise architect, which is a much harder job to get than a cloud architect because it's more closer to the business. And when I think about Vladimir, I can never get his name right, but I think it because it's like a Russian name. But when I see him, he was 24. We were done with him, and he was at North Highland. And when I think of Jeffrey West, who was doing some kind of really cool geospatial GIS imaging, nothing to do with what we did, and he left our program, hired as a solution architect with Kalian. And Balwinder was a stay-at-home mom, and then she's at Microsoft. I can give you AWS example. I can give you any example. And the point is, but they learned the right thing. So since there are no entry-level jobs, and most likely never will be again, because AI does a better job than an entry-level employee does, you never need to be entry-level. You just need to train for senior things. So, my first life, I worked with all people, and you know what their first job was? They were physicians. It was their first job. And I also, know people that have gotten their first job as a lawyer. That's their first job. That's what they got done when they were out of school. Nafuli was a great student of ours who got his first job as a chief technology officer after about a year with us. Great guy. But the key, he was great. All these people I'm talking about are really studying and they're mastering a craft. And any one of us can do it. We can all do it. But we've got to get the right information, learn the correct information, and do it until we're done learning. And by the time we're done good and we really have the skills, two things happen. One is if you know how to message yourself, and Alonzo can talk about that because he's an expert with messaging and he helps our clients build their brand. When you build the right brand, but you can't build the right brand when you don't actually have the underlying knowledge because you won't know what to actually build. So there's that. And then when you've got the competence to explain what you know simply, there's no jobs you can't get. In fact, my first job was a senior engineer. 3 months later, I was the lead architect. Right after that, I got a senior architect job at a bank where they were looking for close to 20 years. But I did have 9 months. And then I was the principal architect within 2 years. Now, I did study every day. I did everything I could, and you can too. So seriously, go find what you want, go love it, and then really, really learn. Get that free ebook on how to become an architect and learn all those skills. And join our Spark Free webinar. I'd love to talk to you. And maybe you've got a certain set of skills that we can help you find something with to do in the meantime while you're learning what you want. We'd be happy to help you with that too.
Couldn't have said it better. Now, Tamio, I want you to think about. He said, okay, let's get that third one out. I forgot that fast. So what are the technical skills needed to become a prominent cloud architect?
Now, that is a really great question. So let's talk about them. It's going to be networking design skills to a certain degree. And here's the reason why. When you connect, if you want to access your systems on the cloud, they're going to be connected over a network. And if you don't know networking, you won't be able to connect to them on the cloud. Plus, if you don't know networking, what'll happen is the systems won't talk to each other, things will break and collapse. And most things that have problems happen because people don't know networking. So you'll need to understand networking. Things like BGP, IP addressing, and IP address planning, subnetting, supernetting, that kind of thing. And things like spanning trees and link aggregation groups and VLANs, tagging and trunking. And you know what? It sounds like a lot. And if you try to learn this on your own, that's a lot. But if you can find yourself a good instructor, you can learn these things pretty easily. And then it's compute. We don't have that many options. And the same compute options we've had for the last 30, 40, 50 years. We can compute on a virtual machine. Actually, virtual machines are since 1999. And that virtual machine is the same thing as if it's an EC2 instance, an Azure virtual machine, an Oracle virtual machine, a Google Compute Engine instance, or a virtual machine in the data center. Containers and container orchestration, which for the most part is Kubernetes. And, the containers themselves, container runtime modules. It's functions as a service. And I can do that with my Nutanix or my OpenStack cloud or my AWS, Azure, or Google cloud. It really doesn't matter. So you basically need to understand those things from the compute side. And then, when we get that, we sort of need to look at certain things from application side. Certain way APIs work and what are API like design patterns, our application design patterns, knowledge about monolith versus microservices, not how to build them, but kind of how these things go together. And then it's about learning what goes into security, and whether it's network security like a firewall or an IPS system, whether it's data loss prevention systems or security event monitoring systems or identity and management systems, those kind of things. And encryption things, it's that. But mind you, everything I said, it's design. And then it's an understanding of the applications business use to improve their business performance. And how would you design these in a manner that's going to design to the organization's needs? Meaning performance, uptime, that type of thing. And how do you keep that business healthy if they have a major business issue, maybe a war were to break out, or there was a hurricane or an earthquake or something big like a forest fire that took out, regions of that business? And how would you plan for that? So these are more the technical things that are designed, and it's how to design them, not how to build them. And I say this, and then people say, but if I don't build them, how am I going to know how to design them? But if I don't get that hands-on? And when I tell people first, the people that design skyscrapers aren't the people that build them. They're like, well, yeah, but that still doesn't apply. So then I ask everybody that I've known and I like to ask the software developers I know that are coding all day, could you explain the architecture of your PC to me? Could you explain your CPU's architecture and how many cores are in it and how do the cores communicate with each other? And, what is that level 1, level 2, level 3 catch on that CPU actually doing? this CPU has more PCI lanes than this other CPU. So how does that affect it for our GPU computing and, say, machine learning or AI performance? And explain to me that NVMe bus off of the PCIe bus for your storage. And they don't know. And the reason I say this is knowing how to build is a completely different skills set on knowing how to design. I hope that answered your question.
Bianca, in the new generative AI architect development program, fully taught by David, both the 3 live weekly classes and recorded classes, what are the office hours like?
So in the program, like all of our programs, David does 2 of the 3 classes that he teaches. He teaches all of the AI architecture classes. But we have 1 class each week where we teach all those critical business skills. So when it comes to business skills, it'll either come out of my C-suite, which is me, Alonzo, or Chris, or the business skills will be taught by PhD business school professors from the University of Tennessee at Martin. So we typically use that. We also periodically have additional architects coming in, sometimes architects that work for AWS, sometimes maybe somebody that worked for another company. And occasionally we have like directors and VPs of cloud companies coming into our students to talk about why they'd like to hire our students and what's different about our students than our others. And, on that weekend, on that last business day, we could be focused on resumes. We could be focused on presentations, focused on sales skills, focused on your executive presence, focused on, your interview. So that's what we typically do. Office hours, the office hours on this are the same office hours as the rest of our programs. We have a time once per week where the student can actually come in and ask one of our teaching assistants questions about the program. So it's the same time and they vary each week. You also have Slack access to David, and I know he's happy to respond to messages to students, and he does so all the time.
And Tayeb, the pros and cons. 1, starting a startup funding company with equity. Number 2, product-based company. Number 3, open source company. And finally, 4, with services-based company.
Okay, so let's start with the startup. And it being funded or not is not really the issue. Most of them are going to fail. Like 2, 3, or like 80, 90% of them are going to fail. What really matters? What should you look for in a startup? You need to look at the leader. Is that leader able to run a successful business? Have they had other successful businesses in the past? What's their track record? Do they come from that big business environment where they've learned it and have a lot of business acumen and knowledge? Can they go out there and sell? Can they go out there and present? And can they go out there and lead? And can you trust that person to have your back in good times and bad times? Because startups have bad times. And if the answer to all of that is yes, that might be a great place to take the risk. Because if you go there and the risk works, you move up into much, much bigger positions. So that's the thing to think about with that. And I have absolutely no problem with those roles. I typically worked in big environments, but that's something to be there as well, just to think about. Product-based companies. So it depends on what you mean by product-based companies, because there's different kinds of product-based companies. So it depends, and it also depends on what you're going to be doing there. I would not want a back-end job at a product-based company. I would want a customer-facing role whenever possible. First, they're much more secure. Because when it comes down to layoffs, here's what product-based companies do, and most is they've got stuff they have to sell. And your back-end developers are not selling anything, even though they're very important. And sadly, you can typically replace your back-end developers very cheaply by going overseas because they're not customer-facing and they're not dealing with relationships. So in tough economic times, you can literally see them get rid of a lot of the back-end people. And then they go and hire more salespeople and more sales engineers and more architects. In fact, one of the biggest tech companies just did it about 2 weeks ago. They did a couple of big layoffs. And a day later, you see all these sales engineers positions posted because they're hiring people to bring in money. So there's that. If you're going to be a product-based company, it has to be you have to feel comfortable with the company. You have to feel comfortable with their message. For example, when I was at Cisco, I was very comfortable with the message. Here was the message. Make sure you get your clients' problems solved. That was clear. Change the way we live, work, and play in a positive way. If we had something that wasn't good for the customer, Cisco said, don't sell it to the customer. If we did our absolute best to design something correctly and brought in a great team to build it, and it didn't work, and they only bought $2 million of product, if Cisco had to spend $10-20 million to go fix it to make sure that you were satisfied, they did it. So when I was at Cisco and they said, ask, I'm like, what do you want? When they say jump, I said, how high? I loved it, and I was there. I mean, I was just thrilled to be there. So there's that. But, you know, I also worked at a product-based company that was great when I joined them. And at one point, the product slipped. And I didn't feel comfortable recommending the product anymore. So if you're going to go to a product-based company, it's like finding a martial arts leader. Make sure the person that's your sensei is a good person that you want to follow, that you actually believe in. And understand, in a product-based company, they have more financial resources than others. But the biggest key to your salary in a product-based company is what can you do to drive sales? So I kind of hope that makes sense to you. Product-based companies typically also can give you stock, which is great, either in restricted stock, either in stock options or restricted stock grant. They typically have good benefits. So I got to tell you, I've had a lot of good time at product-based companies, and I absolutely love it. Now, an open source company, I mean, I don't know what you mean by that. And if you're dealing with an open source company like an IBM Red Hat, well, that's a great company, but that's, again, going back to a product-based company, even though it's open source. If you're dealing with open source, you know, but kind of one of those volunteer communities, probably not your best long-term career option. And as far as a services-based company, again, it really depends. If you're going to be in a consulting firm like an Accenture, Deloitte, KPMG, Capgemini, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I've got lots of graduates working in these places, I think it's a great environment. They will give you further and further education, more and more leadership development skills, more executive presence, more business acumen training. And in a consulting firm like that, you will meet people from the C-suite and a wide variety of companies who have a tremendous amount of educational opportunities available for you. You will also travel a lot. You will also work a lot, and kind of keep these in the back of your mind. So any of these are good options, which is right for you. And, you know, Alonzo, maybe talk about risk and, you know, what people can actually do at different times of their lives when they need to work versus when they don't need to work.
Yeah, I think, you know what, when it comes to all four of these options, your ability to sell will be paramount. You know, case in point, open source. People don't know probably what that particular product or service within open source does. So you have to communicate its value, product-based, communicate value, startup. You guys are new on the block per se, and people need to know what your value prop is. Communicate value, services, communicate value. So you see the common denominator is your ability to sell something to people to showcase the FOMO or fear of missing out of what they could stand to lose by not using your startup, product, open source, or services company. Now, when it comes to, say, for instance, a consulting role, it's an interesting dynamic because within a paid salary, you're still selling yourself as a commodity. You're your own particular brand. You're going to be known by being a great cloud architect, enterprise architect, or those sub-disciplines of networking, security, and so forth. So you're going to have to sell and ergo, again, communicate your value. So my wife, she has been one of the best consulting people that I've ever known. She's done multiple top 3, top 4 tiered consulting firms. And one of the things that you got to understand with that is that a considerable amount of time will be on the road. If you have you're going to need a strong support base to understand that you're going to be on the road 30, 50, maybe 80, maybe even 100% of the time, depending on what the goals are for the business and what you're willing to do to be a part of that success. So being on the road, having that road warrior mentality, being able to provide those services, continually hone in on your value proposition. So if they need somebody to be very good at this particular project to yield X amount of 7, 8 figure costs or purchasing for that business, you're going to be that go-to person. So make sure that if you want consulting, you're going to be able to deal with said high-paced environments, being on the road, being able to pivot off of one particular project into the next, because change is the only constant with these particular roles. So I say all this, and Mike has shared a lot of valuable information. No matter what you decide to do, value proposition, communication, and be able to showcase at a high level, high pace, the benefits of that particular company, regardless of what it is, to move forward in your career.
Yeah. Thanks, Alonzo.
Always a pleasure. Prab, hello, my friend. Hi, Mike and Alonzo. I am sorry this is a little tech question. During my research, I came across terms, colocations, and cloud adjacency. Could you please share your thoughts?
So let's talk about a co-location, because cloud adjacency is a vague term that can mean a few different things. It could also be that it's close to the cloud. It could be your storage is close to the cloud. So there's a lot of things that it could actually mean. Regarding co-location, and so here's what a co-location environment is. Somebody builds a data center, meaning they come in and they set up the facilities, they set up all the racks, they set up the power, they set up the cooling systems, the networking, and they rent you space in it. But instead of it being like the cloud providers like AWS, you typically can buy your own servers and they leave them there. And then if you need somebody to power off or power cycle your server, they just do it for you. It's included in your co-location fee, which is included in your rent. So typically speaking, it's that. So if you actually think about it, and co-locations were available long before the big cloud providers were around, they were really doing the same cloud computing. They were renting out space to their network and their data center. But, why is co-location often cheaper? So if I want to get one of the newest AMD EPYC servers, and I want to max it out, I want to have some fun with it. I want to put like 192 or 256 cores in there, about 4 to 6 terabytes of DRAM in there, and a really cool NVMe RAID array that's going to give me more storage than I can think about. Dealing with about 300 grand. I can pop that thing into the co-location center. I get a high-speed connection to the co-location center. And you know what I pay for that server? 300 grand plus maybe a small fee for renting the space. Now I go to the cloud and I get that same server and I rent it on demand for 4 years and I pay $6 million for it. So it gives you a lot of the benefits of the cloud without having to deal with the cloud providers and their transit fees from point A to point B and all these other kind of things that are actually going on. So it gives people the ability to do it. Now, what's the downside of the co-location? The downside is you actually have to know something. You have to know networking. You have to know your, whether it be your Nutanix cloud software, you have to know your OpenStack cloud software or your VMware software. You need to have network engineers that truly understand networking. Of course, if you have people in the cloud that don't understand networking, your whole cloud infrastructure is going to collapse anyway, which is, what they didn't tell people initially. But, that's the thing. So co-locations are great. I've used co-locations many, many times. And if you think about it, you can do a combination of both. So what you can typically do is you can have some in the cloud, some in the data center, some in a co-location site. And for a small business, the co-location site can honestly be the best value. They could buy a couple of refurbished servers, which would be the same as general purpose cloud compute servers, get them with a warranty on it, Stick it in a co-location center, and they have remote hands in case any drives break. They can just pop them in and pop them out for you. And why do I say this? Well, like the generation of servers that are E5 26A 87 V3s from around 2015, they're about $500 now, but they're about $1,100 to rent a month to rent those servers on AWS. So people can use these co-location sites in a very cost-effective way. But the co-location spaces don't give you the vast services that you would get with the public cloud provider. You're not getting that agility of the cloud provider because in most cases it's a drop-off. Now, one of the other things that these co-location centers have been doing is they've been buying their own service, and now they're renting virtual machine access to you there. Doesn't that start to feel like cloud computing? And what are they doing to make that happen, to keep your virtual machine separate? You have these hypervisors, and how are they managing their hypervisors? They're ultimately becoming a cloud environment as well. So when you kind of think about that, I kind of hope it makes sense. But, when you think about cloud adjacent, you could be thinking about cloud adjacent storage. So what might that mean? It might mean the storage is sitting in another data center that's close to the cloud. And that means you'll have low latency access between your storage and the cloud provider. You could also do a cloud like co-location center very close to the cloud provider. And that would minimize the latencies in the handoff. So there's a couple things you could do cloud adjacent, and that's why I give you different options. Wow, sounds like a hurricane outside my house.
Yeah, I heard that. Drifting. I keep hearing about cloud repatriation. How will that affect my career? If I may,
please.
Mike. Your ability, it won't affect your career because you're going to, as far as we know and how we train, you're going to understand about all of these different cloud migration and repatriation to understand overall what's going to be the best value for the business. It doesn't matter what they're doing or what they're not doing. Your job is to facilitate the why, to understand the strategy, what's going to be entailed, who's going to be involved, how much it could possibly cost, and be able to showcase and demonstrate that this effort, the squeeze proverbially is worth the juice is worth the squeeze. So it's not about what they're doing, but how you're going to have the skills to get them from one point to the other. And that's the bread and butter of what a cloud architect does.
Yeah,
right?
and that's the key. Drifting Tangerine, it makes more cloud architect jobs. And here's the reason why. When people realize, wow, that cloud thing was not as promised. And that cloud thing in many ways is more than what was promised. And in other ways, it was less than what was promised. When people said, go to the cloud and it'll be faster, well, it's about this. In some ways it's faster, in some ways it's not. And they said it'll be cheaper. That was the thing that never came to fruition. The cloud is 2 to 3 times more expensive. In some cases more. David Linthicum's number is 250%, and I'm going to stick to that cost in the data center versus the cost in the cloud versus the data center. It's not cheaper. The cloud's more agile. The cloud is nimble. The cloud is scalable. And if somebody sold that to their clients and said, look, you're going to pay more for this cloud thing, but you're going to have this agility, which will enable your business to do more and outcompete its competitors, business would say, okay, this is great. But they didn't. And that's the frustration. So businesses are realizing, oh, wait, this workload in the cloud, well, that's really nice. But this is ridiculous. We're bringing it back. It's cheaper. Now, if you're a cloud architect like the kind of Alonzo and I talked about training, I had every single student I have work with an OpenStack cloud for the last 4.5 years. Why? Because I knew that if you didn't know how to actually create a cloud and work with the cloud itself, and you didn't really know the cloud, it wouldn't matter what you would learn with that from any cloud provider, because they'd be giving you funny marketing names which are meaningless and teach you how to configure, which is not what we do. So there's that. So, but now we need someone that can plan to how do we move this stuff back to the data center? How do we move this stuff to another cloud? This stuff to a community cloud, this stuff to a co-location, and then this stuff on the public cloud and make it all work together. That's the cloud architect. So this is not a problem for us. And this is why I never train solution architects. The solution architect is I only work for a company. I only know one cloud and I recommend 100% of what that service provider provides. Well, there's no reality where any one vendor has the best solution to anything. Is there one best athlete in the entire world? I got to tell you, if it's gymnastics, my pick is Simone Biles. She's just pretty awesome. And my favorite sprinter of all times is actually Usain Bolt. Wow, when I watched him run, it was there. But are they the best football player? I don't know. Who's that? No, who's the best martial artist in the world? Who's the best jiu-jitsu person in the world? Who's the best wrestler? And each one of these things are all different. So lots more opportunity for us. And I've always taught our students multi-cloud because number of the time I want all those athletes on my team, not just, one. So that's why. So everybody's going multi-cloud, 98% of enterprises there. And that means some stuff's going to go back. Some more stuff will go to the data center. Some more stuff will go to the cloud. More jobs for cloud architects because we've got to do that planning. And these planning things get very complex.
Urban Intel. I just recently signed up for your cloud and Gen AI architect courses. Welcome. I have an AS in IT, BS and PM, and just finishing up a MS and PM in November. Is it necessary to go back for an MBA or CS Masters?
Okay, Urban Intel AI. I would tell you not to do a CS Masters for pretty much anybody. And I'll tell you why I'd say it. You're not going to learn enough of anything that would be of value. And it's not going to do anything for your career. Now, if I had a choice, and you don't need to do either one of these, of either an MBA or any other advanced degree right now, other than a law degree or a medical degree, they're probably the three best that I would typically pick up. Because in a CS Masters, they're going to teach you how to code and do all these things which are going to be completely unrelated to your job. And sadly, they'll be talking about things that are kind of outdated, and in many cases, because most of the people that are teaching them are not working with them on an active basis. So a lot of times when I get people out of these programs, we still need to be trained to be ready to actually work in the workforce. So there's that. The fact that you've got a master's degree in program management, that's fine. It really is. What you need to have is not necessarily the MBA, although the MBA can have a big impact on your career, and I generally recommend them, but not to people that have too many master's degrees. Because at some point, then you just become like the school academic person, and people worry about your ability to be functional. So there's that too. But no, you don't need to do it. But you do need to learn how to sell. And you do need to learn how to lead. And you do need to learn how to build a business case and read a financial statement and a balance sheet and understand an organization's capital and understand if that organization would be better in a capital expenditure environment or an operational expenditure environment. You do need to know how to map out business processes and look at the business architecture. You will need to do things like respond to an RFI, RFP, or RFQ, and I promise you they won't teach you any of these things in school for the most part. The MBA will teach some of this. So, we're going to teach you that anyway if you're in our program, so you'll be fine. You really will. Now, if there's a point where you want to do more, I might talk to that school that I'm currently in and say, oh, is there a way I can go from this MS to an MBA? And maybe they can take, a lot of your credits and kind of push them in a transfer environment and make you think about it. And if I was 6 or 8 classes away, I might do that if there's overlap in your classes. But if there's no overlap, I probably wouldn't do it right now. Education doesn't mean what it used to mean right now. And the bigger employers are getting rid of, degree requirements. And for example, Microsoft, Google, so many companies have just said we don't even care about degrees anymore for most positions. They care about your ability to do the job, your energy, your enthusiasm, your passion, your willingness to work, your willingness to go above and beyond, how much they can trust you, and how safe you are. Do you make mistakes? Are you sloppy? You know your limitations, that kind of thing.
Couldn't agree more. From Izu, I'm trying to pursue a cloud architecture career. I don't have any degree. What's your advice, please?
So attend the webinar tomorrow on how to get your first cloud architect job, and also download the free book. So for you, it's about your skills. So Daniel Bosa was a student of ours. He was 20 years old. He didn't graduate high school, let alone college, and JP Morgan Chase hired him. I think Robert Welch had an associate degree. Delroy Bad, he didn't have a tech background at all. He was working on ambulances. I think he had an associate degree. So the degrees don't matter that much, but what does matter is your skill and your communication skills. And why do I say this? There's a difference in the sound of an uneducated person and an educated person. And often people that have gotten a formal education communicate in a more educated manner, but not always. So if you can read a lot, if you have the opportunity to give some presentations and sell some things and get good at it, no one will know that you didn't go to college. That's one of the ways. Here's the other way you can detect someone that doesn't have a degree: how they write. Typically speaking, those people that have a degree typically have a little better writing than those people that don't. So you can polish up your speech patterns, and maybe yours are already great. You can polish up your writing and make it great, and maybe yours are already great. That kind of mitigates a lot of that stuff. So what else do I get if somebody went to college? And Alonzo, I'll let you talk about the skills to learn and, the things about, being well-rounded in things. So I know you're going to do a better job on that than I will, because I know you know what it is to be a total gentleman and explain all those things that he needs to know. But what else do I get if I saw you went to school? Well, school can get hard. School can get boring. And it's like, I got a full-time job. I'm in school, and you stuck through it. So typically thinking, when I get someone that finished college, I know they will fight a little bit hard to get it done. So I get that. So they're not a quitter to a degree. And that means something, because I don't want to hire a quitter. The next thing I get out of someone that went to school is often someone that can follow directions, because they tell you, in order to do this paper, you need to do it this way, and this way. Guess what? If you can follow directions, I don't care whether you went to school or not. But I need people that can actually follow directions. Otherwise, when you lead a company, they'd be like cats going in all different directions. And I love cats, but that's kind of hard to manage. My cat manages me. So there's that. So if you have those two, and the other thing that we get out of college is, I'm not even sure they teach us that much in college, but they teach us how to learn. We're forced to learn how to learn. So if you can find a way to go out there and read and learn from reading, and you go out there and read and you learn and you well-round yourself, college doesn't matter anymore. I have friends with master's degrees that are less educated than people that I know that read 2 books a week. I've got one friend who's one of the most educated people I know. I literally call him anytime I need to know something outside of my specialty. And he didn't go to school, but I think he's read about 30,000 books. So it doesn't matter, you're there. So then it's about learning the right skills. And, in this webinar, we'll talk about the right skills. But Alonzo, I want you to kind of cover those things that where somebody, like, if they're all polished, like they've gone to school, versus if they're not polished, like they didn't. Talk about what they are and talk about how we can learn them in so many different places. And it's one of the things we focus on when we teach people. But, why don't you highlight on that, because it's so important, Alonzo.
Absolutely. Is it one of the things that is key, whether you're educated or not, is how well are you able to influence people? Mm-hmm. How well are you going to negotiate your desires on the playing field over someone else's? Case in point, if you have children, if you have a spouse, you're negotiating. You want to go somewhere, or you don't want to do or pay for something. So you have to provide the why as to get your point across, to win the discussion, and to overall move your overall goals above that particular, in that particular environment. That is something that you are happy that you can leverage with or without a degree. These are some of the things. These are life skills. These are, if you, for lack of a better term, these could be considered street smarts. Is how are you going to negotiate a conversation to your benefit? That is a good part of sales. So when it comes to a cloud architect career, how are you going to be able to extrapolate something complex and redefine and refine it into something simplistic for other people to understand? So my son, there's a lot of things that are going on in the world. How am I able to simplify these things in a way that he can understand, but also shielding him from things that could harm him? That requires a refinement of complex concepts into a way that they can understand. Much like a CEO, they want to make money, but they don't want to deal with the complexities of technology. Your job is to communicate how they're going to get something great out of this technology, which we're going to yield for the business. These are a lot of the things that you're going to learn as a cloud architect. So without me understanding how you communicate, your personality, your ability to communicate concepts to people, let's assume that let's look on the other end of the spectrum. You're shy. You don't speak to people much, or maybe you don't communicate as effectively as you can to be optimal in a cloud architect position. Get in front of not only do we ask you to download our content and show up for the next webinar tomorrow, but take a look in the mirror. Look at yourself. How would you convince you to buy this or go here or purchase said services for a long duration of time? What would it take to convince you to be in that, to accept your own personal sales pitch? Are you looking at your nonverbals? Are you looking at yourself in the eye? Are you looking all over the place when you're having a discussion? Or are you convincing yourself that I would buy from me? Ask yourself these particular things. Write down the pros and cons of how you communicate. Let's start there. Think about how well you communicate. Do you write well? Do you speak well? If great, if so, great. If not, what do you need to do to mitigate that? So communication, personality, the ability to write, the ability to sell, the ability to be able to deal with conflicting personalities, conflicting people who may criticize how you go about these solutions, people that you may not be authorized to manage, but you still have to lead. How would you go about doing these things to facilitate an outcome for your leadership? These are some of the concepts that don't require a degree, but require a sense of communication, confidence, leadership, soft skills, emotional intelligence to deal with the hard stuff, among other things that we teach. And with these things, when you yield these things with a strong command, and I'm not saying a strong dictatorship, but your own personal ability to do these things, these are things that are going to yield promotion, success, outcomes, notoriety, thought leadership, things of that nature, because you're going to have that experience and be able to communicate its value to many of people to be very successful. For Mari, what do you think about Kindryl company?
I haven't worked with it that much, but it's quite a good cloud company from what I know. I don't remember whether it's still with IBM or it's not with IBM anymore, but any company that's had an association with IBM for at least for a period of time, they're typically very strong. And the reason they're typically very strong is when you deal with most companies, it's like, here, we got this tech thing to sell you. When you deal with IBM, it's, what are your goals? What would you consider a success? And how do we get you there? So I'd be very happy to work at a company like that. I can tell you some of the students we've trained of actually working at Kindryl, and they're doing very well with it. So I think I only know good things.
And my mom, she retired from IBM, and I understood that culture and how they went about business. I was surrounded by a lot of her peers. And we also had prior students who actually accepted a role from Kindryl. And I also have a good friend of mine who worked there as well. There was never anything negative to say. And even if we did know anything negative, that's not what we discussed. Yeah. We're all about agnosticism here, but we also understand that there's a lot of key organizations like Kindryl that personally and from our students have yielded great experiences, business value for their clients. Back to Tayeb. Amazon, Microsoft are nowadays asking DSA for RSE role. I mean, there's a lot of the DevOps buckets. It's very overwhelming to do lead code questions also. Can you share your thoughts on learning DSA, Mike?
Yeah, so let's first talk about, you're talking about a very hardcore engineering role where people are going to be learning data structures and various algorithms. So let's talk about this. There's a lot of reasons I don't recommend careers in software development. I think 30 to 50% of software engineers may be out of a job inside of the next 5 years. And I say this because I've interviewed thousands of people. And what I need from the people I hired versus what most people think we need from an engineer is nowhere close. And the best engineers that I work with, they're like magicians. But I've also worked with a lot of people that I can tell you that AI would do a better job than they could. And that puts companies in a bad situation. So I advise against software roles for a lot of reasoning. And, you know, I recommend it because architecture pays more, like 2 to 3 times more throughout your career. Architecture gets closer to the C-suite, so it's going to get you closer to the CIO, CTO type roles. Architects get more respect. And in tough economic times, the people that are behind the scenes, which are the heroes of getting everything done, they're the ones that get laid off. And they get laid off because they can be replaced by tech or they can be shipped to lower cost parts of the world. And they're the first to let go because they're considered an expense versus a solutions architect that's bringing in money by designing and selling a solution. So for all those reasons, I tend not to recommend engineering careers. Now, let's talk about if you want to be an engineer and if you want to stay an engineer and if you want to thrive in an engineer. Yes. Understanding data structures, understanding algorithms, and understanding how to code for AI is going to be mission critical to staying there. Knowing DevOps tools are going to be absolutely critical. Now, let's actually talk about the level that I need in terms of a developer if for someone in a role like this. Leak code should feel silly easy to them. And if leak code doesn't feel silly easy to them, they need to get a lot better. And a lot better at these kind of things if they're going to stay in the software development world with the world of AI. Because if you're going to have somebody that's going to be first, that's going to have you, they're going to need 3 to 5 times the capabilities, and that kind of stuff is going to have to be silly easy. So, what my thoughts are, if you really want to know, these are the careers that I would study, and you could do well in them. Program management is a fine career because it requires a person to check in with other people. AI can't do that, so you're safe. Any kind of leadership, and that could be engineering leadership, architecture leadership, leading teams of people. People are going to be important to us, and as we have less people with more productivity from AI, good leaders are going to be needed. So any kind of person in leadership. Any kind of sales role, like an account manager where you're selling these solutions, typically pay more than the engineers that are going to be back end building these solutions. They're also good. Account manager, global account manager, those kind of executives. Any architect role. And architect roles are my favorite because they're the most stable. And you get paid very well. And all these new technologies come out. Oh, great. I can design that architecture for you. And what am I going to do? I'm going to build an architecture team of other architects and their specialties and all these engineers to get their expert tech guidance. I'm going to go meet with people. I'm going to present to people. I'm going to build relationships. I'm going to sell it. And guess what? You can't remove me with AI. And the fact that I can bring in business, like I've worked on $1 billion plus deals and brought them in, paying somebody well is nothing when they're bringing in that kind of money. So I like architecture careers. And I think they're my main ones. I think if you had a law degree and wanted to become an AI ethicist or a PhD in ethics, that could also be a good career moving forward. And I actually predict a comeback of network engineering and network architecture roles. And here's the reason why. With cloud repatriation, many systems have to come back. A lot of people didn't realize the cloud was so exciting to them that they forgot about networking. And there's a massive shortage of people that actually understand networking. And without the network, nothing works. So what happens, you have these little supply and demand curves. Everybody stopped studying networking. All the network engineers either went to the cloud or retired. And now you got a critical networking shortage. So network architects for sure, network engineers potentially, because a lot of that engineering is so detailed. It's a little bit beyond, potentially AI. Some of that networking stuff gets really complicated.
And another thing about that, Tyab, is let's take a quick glimpse at generative AI. They've got new things concerning agentic AI, where it's even less human interaction. And even still, they've got coding assistants from different cloud service providers to handle this code, which reduces the human footprint of coding that much further. And shrinks that ability. So that means that you have to start expounding on more human-facing roles to create more opportunity for yourselves. We're always going to need coding. We're also always going to need engineers, but you're going to have to continuously redefine your value to that organization. And it's not just going to be about coding or the different 7 or I believe maybe 8 steps of DevOps when it comes to that different technology. So as technology evolves, continue to diversify your skill set to remain relevant. The last thing, just much like technology, it is a flowing river. It never stays in one spot, and you can jump in and jump out, but that particular spot will never be the same as when you got out of it. So ensure that when you are in that flow of technological evolution, that you're continually strengthening your skill set to be not only in demand, but that valuable asset that organizations need. Okay. Leonard, what are the key trends, Mike, and challenges in the cloud computing industry that are likely to shape job opportunities in the near future? It's cool.
So that's a great question, Leonard. So there's two massively competing factors going on right now. Actually, maybe 3. The first factor is people went, uh-oh, this cloud thing costs way more than we ever were told there would be. So it's coming out. So what does that mean? That means if they're leaving the public cloud, people are not going to give up cloud computing benefits. They're not going past that. So that means private clouds. Who's the winner in private clouds? VMware, Nutanix, and OpenStack. That means, a lot of our cloud architect work might be designing high performance systems in the data center. And nobody's going to give up the scalability and the agility of the public cloud now that we've all gotten used to it. So that means everything is becoming hybrid multi-cloud. Now, it's funny, and you can see the number of articles I've reached because I've been in every tech magazine you can think of, from CIO Magazine, Tech Republic, Tech Radar, Information Week, Data Center Magazine, DevOps. I mean, if there's a tech publication, I'm in it. And years ago, I said, I was in all of them saying there's no chance that customers will, or that organizations will ever stay single cloud. They're all going to go multi-cloud. Well, now 98% are multi-cloud. So what does that mean? You may notice the cloud providers getting rid of what I called the silly services, where the cloud providers tried to create something that was proprietary, that was a lesser version of the stuff that existed out there by the main people that you could use in multi-cloud, and a lot of those features are kind of going away. So what does that mean? It means more for the Mongo databases of the world. It means more for the Apache Cassandras. It means more for the Oracle databases and vendor-neutral databases versus vendor proprietary. It also means that AI is going everywhere. So now, what's going to be there? Where's this compute kind of thing? It means now organizations realize that their data was not good enough. So now they got to create a good data architecture. So there's lots of work in data. That it's not just generative AI, it's all this other cool stuff we can do with AI, which is there. So there's that. And employers are struggling with productivity of employees and a few other things. So they're going to be very keen to go out there and bring this kind of stuff together. So a lot of these things are really the kind of things that you need to think about. So where does that mean? More hybrid cloud, more multi-cloud. Now, what does that really mean to the architect level? It's one thing to know AWS. It really is. But now you've got to know AWS, Azure, Google, Oracle, OpenStack, Nutanix, VMware. And you still need to know networking, and you still need to know security. And that becomes harder and harder and harder and harder. And the other trend, Leonard, is that 70% of all these cloud architectures have actually failed. They've done nothing for the people that bought them from a business perspective. So all that stuff needs to be re-architected. And now you got to be on more systems, which means your role just got bigger and further away from the tech. So less technical, more business, more of those leaderships of being able to get the right people in the right room, many more stakeholders that you're dealing with, much more vendor management that you're dealing with, and a lot more contact with a lot more people. So more detailed architectures, so you have to be great, but it's more that business architect that we were talking about. that we've always been talking about. And here was the reason why. We knew people were going to be moving in and moving out, especially the way they went to the cloud. Here, I'll take you off of this virtual machine that you have that's running completely perfectly and costing you a couple bucks a year. And now it's going to cost you $1,000 a month. It was just stuff like that. And that's not even to share your data everywhere. It was just people went there for the hope of things and they found out they weren't true. Cloud's still going. Lots of people are going to be going to the cloud, but it's going to be smart. These systems run 24 hours a day. We're sticking them in our data center. These systems need to be low latency. We're sticking them in our data center. This sensor stuff that's out there on our IoT sensors, yeah, that's going to go in some cloud 5G data center somewhere, sitting inside of a Verizon or somebody else's data center like that, which is managed by the cloud. That kind of stuff we see. We see more distributed stuff across more systems. And that's great for cloud architects. Not as good for the solutions architects, but it's still great for cloud architects. And the solutions architects will still be fine because they're going to have to sell the stuff to know more of these organizations. We may have had a technical glitch with Alonzo. This hurricane that's floating out there in the Gulf of Mexico has not been good for any of us. Mr. Gibbs, you were mentioning a book for consultants, you guys, something around consultancy of one of my sessions. So an architect is a strategy consultant, but we're not just focusing on the tech strategy. We're focusing on the systems that actually make it possible. So I know you're learning architecture, so you're getting all those pieces, but there are books on the way McKinsey consults, which could be quite good and could give you some additional information. And I always thought they were quite good. I think there was one, the McKinsey Way, that I thought that was pretty interesting. I read it when I started my management consulting days, but it actually was fairly helpful to me. Because anything we do in architecture is really just consulting. It's about going in there and meeting your client and asking the right questions and creating these mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive hypotheses, and then testing these things and going through and interviewing people. So all that kind of stuff that we do with, and we did a management consulting where you might create a focus group. Well, you actually may create a focus group in your architecture and have people test it. And how do you feel about it? How do you like it? So a lot of similarities there.
Drifting. I'm really confused, Mike. I watched several big companies do layoffs and a day later they were hiring. What's going on with these decisions? Tell it, Mike.
Okay, so I'm going to give you all of it, the real truth and the honest truth. And it's a little hard here. So I feel bad kind of saying it, but I have to give you the truth, because if you're going to build your career, you can't build it on misinformation or feel-good information. So a couple things are going on. One is organizations are weighing where they're at now. And they're weighing where they're going into the future. Does it sound like an architecture piece to you? It is. It's business architecture. And they're thinking about what technologies and things are going to change that are going to enable them to do things differently and what they can actually compete with in the modern world. So organizations are doing two things. I can think of one tech company that just did 3 layoffs, that the day after they did a massive layoff just posted a whole bunch of sales engineer jobs. So what's going on is they're getting rid of certain types of people. They're laying off people in some of those back-end engineering jobs that are in the bottom 30 to 40% of the staff that they have. Why? Because AI is already better than the bottom 30 to 40% of the staff they have. And they're in back-end, these kinds of positions. So I'm going to tell you what every employer does. And here's the next piece. And then I'll go back to this. So what every employer does is they stack rank their employees. In every team, you have a rating system. Let's say Cisco. If you were awesome, you got an X. If you were like in the top 5%, if you were in the top like 15% or 10%, you got an E+. You were great. If you got an E, you were normal. If you got an E-, well, that wasn't good. So every year the organizations rate it, and they rate their people. And, if you're an organization that has, say, 80,000 people, and 8,000 of them are E- or your bottom 5%, they're the first ones that go. So I'm not talking about Cisco in this layoff or any company, but what we typically do is let go the bottom 10%. But not always. Sometimes we get rid of people that are actually awesome that are not in the bottom 10%. So let's talk about those. If I have a recruiter that works for my firm and I'm going to go on a hiring freeze for the next year or do a layoff, I could get rid of a lot of my back-end recruiters. And organizations often do. What about my marketing team? I can't get rid of my salespeople because my salespeople go out and hunt every day and they bring money back. But, the message we have around this product, you may be able to keep this for a little while. Do I really need to run these paid ads right now and all these advertising things? Or can I send my army of salespeople that are just going to show up and bring things happen? So they get rid of some marketing people. Now, okay, you've got some back-end software developers. Well, if they're the best you have, you keep them. If they're a complainer, they get laid off. If they're all day building their brand on LinkedIn and making 3 and 4 LinkedIn videos a day, and they're not representing the company well, again, they're laid off because employers are paying people to work, not go to LinkedIn and build their brands. So a lot of these people were taken. So a lot of it is back-end work that's just not going to exist in the future, which is why we stopped selling our cloud engineering program. I didn't want to sell that anymore because I feel bad about. I love engineers, but I didn't want to charge people for a career which I thought was going to be reduced in the future by AI. So that's the real reality. So generally speaking, high performers don't get laid off. Now, what if an organization had a high performer team? Well, in that team, what's going to happen is the manager is going to say, you got 10 people on your team. You got to get rid of 1 or 2. So what do? They keep the best to 8 and they get rid of the bottom 2. And I want you to think about how you would do it if you were there and if you were in the same situation. And the next thing they do a couple of days later after these layoffs is then they say, wait a second, we got to sell, right? We had some of these sales engineers that we got rid of. They were the bottom 10%, but we still need to sell. Let me bring in another sales engineer. We now have a little budget because we no longer have to worry about these developers here. Let's go hire some more account managers or some sales rep. We got rid of all these people and products and services that are no longer going to be needed in the future, and they weren't the kind to go learn. Now we need to go hire for people in AI. So they're changing the team based upon the game that they're actually trying to play. And it's really sad. Now, here's the thing. It's not how long somebody's been with the company. It's how useful they are to the company right now and how they stack rank right now. Because it's like that Janet Jackson song, What Have You Done For Me Lately? And that's the way the employers tend to look at it. But the key to remember is every time there's a layoff, you've got lots of things. And whether you've been laid off or not been laid off, let's talk about it because it's an opportunity. Every challenge is an opportunity. Every problem is an opportunity for you to solve the opportunity to grow rich, accomplish your goals, whatever it is. For those people that weren't laid off, there's an opportunity typically to move up into management. And I've gotten promoted during many layoffs. I've actually survived 20 layoffs and not been laid off. And there's lots of reasons, things that I did ahead of it not to get laid off. If someone has been laid off, they have a couple of options. Option 1 is go do something different. Maybe they were never a manager, but they worked as an engineer for the last 10 years. Learn some management skills, get some management training, come back with a better, higher paying job than you had before. That's one option. Option 2 is retrain for a completely different career. I used to practice internal medicine when I was a nurse practitioner, and I said, you know what? This isn't, I want to do tech. And you know what? 6 months later, I was an architect, working as an architect. So there's that. Or, and here's the reality, if the person doesn't want a better job and they're not willing to upskill, which I recommend they do, or they don't want to do something completely different, they have to really think deep and really be objective with themselves. Okay, I was laid off. Was I as good as the rest of my team at this? Was I as good at the rest of the people at this? Did I have problems dealing with others? Was it communication skills that were weak? They must have thought I was in the bottom 10%. So how do I become in the top 10% so I can not only get hired again, get hired for a better job than I had in my same field in the past and continue to thrive and not have to worry about a layoff thing again? And that's the thing that I've always advised people to do. And I hope that kind of helped. But that's really what's going on here.
Jesse, I have been a Cisco network engineer for 18 years. Do you think I could make the jump to Azure?
Hi, Jesse. So the answer is you can do anything you want. But what is it that you want to do? I actually don't know what a Cisco network engineer is, and I say this being slightly silly, but I worked for Cisco for a decade. My CCIE number is 7417, but I don't know what a Cisco network engineer is because I've never been on a network that didn't have other devices that weren't Cisco, and they were all part of the network. So I know what network engineering is. If Cisco network engineering is just working with Cisco routers and Cisco switches, and maybe Cisco access points, I'd be curious what you actually did with them. Were you designing the routing protocols? Because if you were designing routing protocols and traffic engineering and looking at the network, because some engineers actually do this, and they could be looking at the network and they could say, okay, here's how we're going to set up the architecture for our IGP. Maybe it's OSPF. Here's where we're going to summarize these areas. This is what the backbone is going to look like. What types of connections in between these switches? What protocols are we running these switches? Layer 2, layer 3, rapid spanning tree. You know, whether we're using OSPF single area or IS-IS single area, so we can run some MPLS traffic engineering if we needed to. Like, what's really going on in there and what you're doing? Because if you have those more designy skills, that would be more towards cloud architecture. And then what you would need to learn is those data center technologies and, of course, how to design an architecture. And you could do it. Now, if you wanted to go from routers and switches to cloud engineering, maybe you already know a lot about it and maybe you don't. And here's the reason why. You know, I never wrote a Python script in my entire life. I'm an architect. I don't know how to do much on Linux. I'm an architect. I don't know how to write a bash shell script. I'm an architect. It's not part of what I've done. And when I was in a network engineering role, even before that, I still never touched Linux or touched any of these things. And the reason I didn't need to for my job was I was always dealing with that performance tuning, that optimization, that 100%. Like I tell people, the CCIE was my intro to networking. And after that, that's when I actually learned networking. So everything I did kept me far from it. But maybe you're a network engineer that's been working on a wide variety of systems, and some network engineers have. Maybe you've worked with TACAX and radio system and potentially Active Directory for IAM for your routers, that authentication, authorization, accounting. Maybe you've also been working on Linux systems and Linux-based routers. Maybe you've been doing some route automation with Python. Now that's looking a whole lot more like cloud engineering, and you might already be there. And then it's some additional skills that you might need, like say Terraform and some Windows, but you know, you're a lot closer to it. But the key is, Jesse, you could do whatever you want. I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, Ivan Tamba was a waiter before AWS hired him after our training as a solutions architect. Richard Ferrari was working in a bank's fraud department before he got hired as a solutions architect after our training. Lenny Burnett was our video editor before Citrix hired him as a solutions architect after our training. Jermaine was selling landscaping gear before he got his first enterprise architect job after us. Jennifer was a mental health tech. So the answer is you definitely can make the jump to Azure. The question is, what is it you want to do on Azure? And what skills will you actually need? That's just going to be the key to get there. And the roles that you need, one, will be very different than the skills that you actually need.
And I'm curious to wonder why specifically Azure. Is there a particular goal or culture that you really enjoy that Azure represents, or is that a, you know, popularity contest? There are a lot, an unbelievable amount of organizations that yield a lot of opportunity, and very lucrative ones at that, that may not be as popular, but will probably yield a very rewarding experience for you. So I encourage an audit of what you want to do against the organizations that support your culture, your overall career trajectory.
You know, I think, Alonzo, you picked up the thing that I didn't understand in the beginning. When I said I'm not sure what a Cisco network engineer was, what I was really thinking is, There's no environment where, for the most part, only 2% of the customers that are only going to use a single cloud. And I wanted you to have a great career.
Yeah.
And I've never been in a position where a company didn't have some extreme network switches, some Juniper routers, in addition to some Cisco stuff, and Foundry, F5, and it was all kind of there. It's just part of the system. And I don't really ever deal with anybody that's just Azure or just Cisco or just Google. And I think that's probably what threw me off on there, because I was just thinking, well, exactly what is that?
Yeah.
So I think Alonzo's solid, and it makes total sense, Alonzo.
Yeah, I agree. As people who understand the strength in diversifying an environment and maximizing, optimizing, creating more efficiency, there's never going to be one particular straight up resource that we're always going to rely on, because one particular point equates to one particular point of failure. So if you'd like to clarify, or do you work for Cisco and you're a network engineer? Do you work specifically on Cisco related technology? These type of clarifications help to drill down to better understand who you are, where you come from, and where you want to go.
And I think you hit on something that was good for everybody that's here. If you know BGP, let's say you're coming from a networking background, you could work at Cisco, you could work at Juniper, you can work at Arista, you could work at Extreme Networks, you can work at Palo Alto, you can work at Fortinet. It doesn't matter. You can work at any internet service provider, and for the most part, any company that hires network engineers needs people that know BGP. If you know the configuration commands but not the protocol, then you are stuck. And I can tell you, as soon as I finished my CCI, I immediately started working on gear that wasn't Cisco's. But it was okay. I knew the protocols. All I had to do was learn the commands. Then I worked at a Cisco competitor right after that. And again, it was a new CLI to learn. But, I was doing mostly architecture. So it was really no big deal for me. It was the same BGP, the same OSPF, the same, label distribution protocol, and RSVP signaling. It was all just the same thing, or spanning tree, rapid spanning. So it didn't matter where I was at. So good finding on that, Alonzo. And Jesse, come back and spend more time here.
So if you have any, we'd love to have more of those questions. I think we've had a considerable amount of very interesting questions to think about, but we'd love to know and have you share more with us. We're going to be here for possibly another 14, 15 minutes. We want to make sure all of your career questions, your desire to pivot, or if you think that staying where you are is going to be best to your advantage. What are your educational goals? Are they relevant? Are they valuable to where you want to be? These are the things that we are really good at answering, and we've provided a lot of great answers to what you have so forth. So bring them. We're here for you. We want to answer your questions. We want to help you with your career goals and help guide you to what's going to be a long-standing, in-demand opportunity for you, and making sure that you have the right competency and skills, and even dive into some certifications that, although they are complementary, they may be able to even help into honing, shaping, and rebranding who you are as a cloud professional.
Absolutely. So I'll give you guys 1 or 2 minutes to see if there's any questions. Okay, so let's see. Jesse came back.
Got it. He doesn't work for Cisco, only work on Cisco routers and switches, configuring protocols, and building routes on equipment.
That makes a lot more sense then. The hands-on configuration role. Yes, you could do that, absolutely. But I think we have to determine whether you want an architecture career or an engine career, because you could do either one, but the training is going to be completely different. For that architect role, it's going to be system design. It's going to be leadership skills. It's going to be sales skills. It's going to be executive presence and knowledge of business. For those engineering jobs, it's going to be a lot more building like you're dealing with right now. But it's not just going to be the networking. You'll still be working on these Cisco routers and switches is great. And that way, when you need to configure a firewall, if you ever have to, you're going to know how to do it as well, because it's going to be almost the same. There are people that actually use DevOps type tools on routers, things like Terraform. So if you're familiar with any of that infrastructure as code, you're going to be good. If not, on the cloud engineering side, learn it. On the cloud architecture side, it's about your system design, which is completely different. On that cloud engineering side, you've got to have some good, strong Linux and Linux administration skills. On that cloud architect side, you don't need that. You need to understand how all the various technologies work and how you design them in a cohesive strategy for your client's business goals. If you're going to be a cloud engineer, it's no longer just the routers. And so the network is so much easier than what you're used to doing. So now you're going to be doing things like writing Windows PowerShell scripts and Bash shell scripts for the cloud engineer. For the cloud architect, you're not scripting anything, but you're going to be responding to a proposal and giving a presentation and going sales calls. So if you've got more questions, let us know, but we want to do anything we can to help you. And that's why we do these things, because you can always go to where you're going. Always, always, always. For most of us, the only limitation we have is ourselves. It's like we look and say, I can't do that. You need to be surprised what you can do. A lot more than you think you can do. And if you're willing to go when you're tired and keep at it, you can't stop that person. Whether it's my father-in-law that came to America owing money on the airplane tickets that he had to his brother from Greece. Well, I'm not joking. He worked as a dishwasher full-time and he worked as a cook full-time, and he and his brother had a little cement building business on the side. Now, it sounds crazy, but he did that every day, 2 jobs, another job on the weekend, whatever handyman kind of work they could get on the end of that. And it took him 7 years, but he bought a restaurant. He grew it into something big. He took care of his family, sent him to school. His kids did good. So, we can all do it. And where we came from, we pushed the button and waited 30 minutes. We had hot water to take a shower. And if you saw what he did and what his family did, and I see this every day, whether it's Ivan Tamba that, was lifting boxes or rocks all day long for $2.10 a day, to being able to be a solutions architect, you can all do it. Just believe in yourselves.
Drift. Should I use the LinkedIn green banner or the new desperate banner? I hear conflicting opinions on it.
Okay, so as a rule, no. And let's talk about why. And let's talk about why you're going to hear conflicting opinions. If you are an internal recruiter of a firm, you're going to hate it not being there. And here's the reason why. They're the people you're actually going to be wanting to send connection requests to. So it can help with the internal recruiters. What do internal recruiters do? They look at a job description with regards to what's in front of them. It has absolutely nothing to do with the real job. And they look at you to see if you match. And if you do, they send you to the hiring manager. And then the hiring manager interviews you. And typically speaking, it doesn't go very far in most cases, because the person that HR brought you, that internal recruiter, is not what the hiring manager wants to hire. So, there's that side of it. So it may help get calls from the recruiters, but they're not going to be your most effective recruiters. Now, the hiring manager perspective is a little different. And let me talk to you about a different kind of recruiter. There's internal recruiters that work for the company itself. And then there are external recruiters that'll get paid $30,000 or $40,000 by the company to find you a job. And if Alonzo is the manager and I'm the recruiter, I call Alonzo and say, Alonzo, I have to tell you about something. I know you reached out to me and told me you were struggling to find a cloud architect, but there's this drifting tangerine that I want you to meet. Drifting tangerine, he presents himself well. He's got strong business acumen. He's got good leadership skills, and I've checked it and I've spoken to him. He understands the network, the data center, and the cloud, and I think you should meet him. And Alonzo says yes. Alonzo interviews that person, and it's the right one for that person. And then Alonzo says, I'm going to hire you. Then Alonzo tells the person time to fill out the application, and I'm going to get you hired. So that's the more effective recruiter when you don't have a perfect resume. When you have a perfect resume, meaning everything looks beautiful on your resume, that internal recruiter is going to be more likely to hire you. So you first got to differentiate yourself, perfect resume versus imperfect resume. And then you got to look at the manager perspective. Now, here's the problem. The manager wants the best people they can hire, because the manager gets fired if his team doesn't do well and promoted and earns more if his team does well. So they're going to be looking for the all-star players, like you would be if you were picking a sports team. Now, most managers are going to look and say, someone's got that green banner on. And lots of them will tell you this. What does that mean? Did they get laid off because they were in the bottom 10% of their employees? That they don't want. Or does this person not care about his current employer finding out that he's looking for a job? Again, they don't want someone that they can't trust. And again, or looking for a new job, and there's that. So there's a lot of that. And if the person with the LinkedIn green banner has a couple of jobs in a short period of time and it's all the same job, again, that looks even worse. Because the manager wants people that are in the job, in the field, that are going to be the best. And it can actually hurt managers reaching out to you, and you in certain ways as well. And if you really have ever been through this, imagine you didn't have money and you wanted to get a loan from the bank. I got to tell you, it's pretty hard getting a loan from the bank when you don't have money. And let's say you wanted to go out on a date, and for some reason, everybody you asked, you just weren't doing really well. And then all of a sudden, you're dating the prettiest girl or boy in your area, and then everybody else wants you because you're desirable to them, so you're more desirable. So you're more attractive to employers when you're already employed. And the green banner often means the person is no longer employed, so that makes the employer tend to wonder why. So to that side, the green banner is definitely not helping you. Now let's talk about the desperate banner. This is potentially the most dangerous thing anybody could do. So who wants desperate people? Not most. Now, there's lots of reasons people end up desperate. I mean, we could have a person whose husband died or wife died, whichever. They're now a single parent and they've got a kid with cancer. That person is desperate for nothing they did on their own. And there's lots of people in desperate positions. But generally speaking, people that are in desperate positions typically don't have all their eggs or their ducks in a row. Maybe they have a drug problem, which is making them desperate, where they couldn't hold down a job. Maybe they kept getting fired from their past job because they couldn't. Maybe they've made bad decisions and they're desperate. For the most part, people that make good decisions are not desperate. Not always, but for the most part. And if you're a hiring manager and you only have a certain number of people that you have time to actually interview, are you going to look for the people that look like they're already in the worst position? Or do you want to find somebody that looks like they're in a strong position? And I ask you to think about it from the perspective of the hiring manager. If you were building a team, let's say it's a soccer team, and you've got the mathletes over there with the Coke bottle thick gloves that won't run, don't walk, but they're really great with math. I love those people. They're geniuses. But you're trying to build a football or a soccer team. You're going to need somebody that can run, right? And somebody that can change directions. And you're going to pick the best athletes first. So think about it that way. And then so there's no best or worst. In some cases, it's going to make sense to put up that green banner. I saw somebody today that put up that green banner and said, I've had 25 years at Cisco. I've had the opportunity to work with all these great people and do all these great things. I've had a chance to file this patent and doing this. If you're looking for someone that can help you achieve this and your goal, help your business do this, help your business do this, I'd love to have a conversation with you. I looked at that and went, classic, nice. And that person has such a good resume. When an internal recruiter clicks on that, they're going to get brought in an interview and they're going to do the job. But if I might have someone else that has a less perfect resume, they're going to make them wonder. And as a rule, when it comes to interviews, it's better to have them love you before you talk about, well, I haven't been working for these last 2 months because of this. And it'll come out on the interview, but at least they like you before they've already prejudged you based on what they saw on paper. I kind of hope that helps. Alonzo, you're a marketing expert. What do you think?
No. And here's why. Think about, would you want to date someone desperate? Desperate is by definition is someone who feel that there is no reason to be hopeful about an outcome. So also think about, say, for instance, someone took pity on you to give you this position. Are you going to conduct your career, your presence within that organization with desperation as well? How are you going to present yourself to a client out of desperation? So your brand is someone who's desperate, and someone possibly will be willing to do anything, ethical or not, with dignity or not, to reach a certain goal. And that is in a industry where trust is a very big part of a career as a cloud architect, enterprise architect. Sharing desperation gives pause, because I think you would be willing to do anything to get that sale, which would include brand damage for the organization, loss of sales, litigation, fines out of governance and compliance. The list goes on and on. So I understand to a degree what LinkedIn is trying to do to ensure that people have an opportunity to present their best selves, to get jobs, especially in this economy. However, how they go about doing it matters. How they go about doing it is unfortunately and inadvertently damaging their brand for these people who tend to subscribe not only to I am in need of work, but also desperate. And also I'm asking, why, if you had to go down, it's already open for work. You're already labeled as, I'm not working right now. I'm wondering why. Now you have this desperate banner. I'm assuming you already went for the open to work banner. That didn't work. Now you have to go to, to another DEF CON of urgency, because whatever you're doing isn't working. And I want to know why. Why won't people hire you? And that kind of puts the alarm out, like, okay, if no one wants to hire them, no matter what they do, what's wrong with them? And I don't want to hire you because I don't want the unknown. And there's a saying, better to be with the devil you know versus the devil you don't. And I don't know what kind of damage you could do to my business. So I tend to shy away, or people would shy away from that. So that is my positioning as someone who's hired people, someone who has been in leadership positions and been on panels to help people, us to decide which is going to be the best candidate. And if I were to see this, I have a big question mark about you. You could be the best person in the world, but if you're at a point where you're pretty much throwing smoke signals out saying, help me, please, just please hire me, I gotta ask myself, why are they not hireable? And I don't want to experiment with my department, my firm, my division, and learn the hard way that the reason why you are on LinkedIn in a desperate fashion is because you're this or you're not. So think about both sides of the street, Drifted.
So I know we ran out of time, but Walking Edits, I'm going to answer his question and then we'll finish there. Hi, Mike.
Hey, Mike, what's the best way to apply for architect jobs or just generally aiming for promotions? And Mike, how do I really sell myself to the hiring and technical managers? I also love the guides and videos.
So Walking Edits, you've got about 4 or 5 different questions in there, so I'm going to answer them separately. What's the best way to apply for architect jobs? First, join us tomorrow on that free webinar, and I can talk to you and assess you and give you better information specific to you. But what's the best way? First, you have to look at your resume. If you got a resume like me, or a resume like David Lithicum, or a resume like Russ White, just go apply for the job, write everything up, and do it meticulously, and you will get phone calls back. If you are not a perfect one, meaning you don't have either multiple advanced degrees and a quarter of a century experience and experience with billion-dollar system designs, well, what's going to happen is applications are probably not going to be your best approach. You'll apply. You'll get auto rejected, auto rejected, auto rejected. So when I deal with people that don't have a good background, that's about going out there and leveraging LinkedIn and actually building a brand. Going out there and creating content that shows you as a thought leader, because an architect is a thought leader. Creation of content that shows that you understand digital transformation, that it's not a single product or a service. It's the cohesive strategy that you can design to align that organization's people, processes, and technology to maximize business returns. It's showing that you've got the business acumen and the leadership to move these organizations, and you understand it. Because while an engineer may have a portfolio of configurations, an architect may have a lot of thought leadership documents they've written, or books they've published, or presentations they've done. So you can do some of that on LinkedIn, but if you're going to do it, it's going to have to be great. It's going to have to look great, because that's going to be the representation of you. So, Alonzo, you've done marketing campaigns for a business. How long might it take just to create maybe the packaging, the graphics of just any product or service?
It takes a while. It could take months, at minimum of weeks, because we have to ascertain the why. Much like there's so many parallels to marketing, communication, visual communications, ad agency work, and cloud architecture. We have to hit our targets, and if we don't know what our target is, how are we going to hit it? I know that sounds vaguely redundant, but it's very true. I need to know what the client is. Let's look at it from an advertising perspective. Who are we marketing to? Why? Where? When? Are they sub-targets? Are they seasonal time frames? How long do we have to reach it? What's our overall return on investment to get it? What is going to be the overall product life cycle? The list goes on and on. Age groups, demographics, things of that nature. And these type of details help us to hone in on that target, because the less information we know, look at the actual target with the red and white circles within it. You know, the less we know, the closer to the edge of the target that we're going to hit. We're not going to hit much. The more we know, we're going to get more of that bullseye.
Exactly. So what Alonzo just talked about in marketing, the audience identification and knowing what to create for them. The reason I asked him this is when you're creating this content on LinkedIn, it's for the hiring managers. It's for the executive recruiters that got paid $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 to get you that job. So it's not going to be something that's going to make the engineers happy. It's not going to make your peers happy. You're writing for that audience. And if you're not used to that audience, for you to write 12 pieces of content to put out on LinkedIn could take you a year. I mean, Alonzo, could it take 6 months to come up with a brand strategy and some graphics that we put out there at the business level? So it could take you some time. So that's the level of quality and level of detail that's going to be. So you have to know what to do first, have the skills. And when you create that level of content, the world comes to you. Robert Welch was one of my students. He did one of the best jobs of it. I gave this guy instructions on how to create content. He followed my advice. He followed Alonzo's, and each day he'd have 4 to 10 people reach out to him. Hey, can we talk about a role? Until he finally found the one that he wanted. So there's that. It's also building a network with the right recruiters, the recruiters that actually know what hiring managers want, that'll prep you on that interview for the hiring manager and will pre-sell you to the hiring manager. So there's that. Mass applying typically is not the best approach. In every application you do fill out, don't click the easy apply button on LinkedIn. There's going to give them something that's going to look icky. You got to send it. You got to tell your resume to the role, highlight what you can do to support them in their goals and their needs. So there's that. So it's not mass. It's the difference between going to McDonald's for a hamburger and going to like a Morton's or a Ruth's Chris and asking them to make you a hamburger. A lot more time, a lot more preparation, much better attention to detail. Because for an architect job, it's an executive job. So you've got to look like an executive. Now, aiming for promotions, here's another story. That is basically 2 separate things. So the first thing you need to do is you got to find out if you're doing a good job. And what do I mean by that? You got to ask your manager, what are your goals? Manager. And then you can figure out if you're helping that manager achieving those goals. If you're doing that, you're doing a good job. Asking that manager and saying, I'd like to move into a manager role. I'd like to move into an architect role. What do you suggest that I do? And get them involved in helping you build a plan. and getting their commitment to support the plan and going in there and doing that. Now, what else do you do to get promotions? Well, when the manager asks for work to be done at meetings and everybody hides under the table, you volunteer it. I want it, I want it, I want it. And you do it and you deliver it with excellence. And when someone gives you a call, you call them back fast and you get known as that responsive person. And when they need someone to stay late at the end of the day, Mike, anybody can help out and solve this problem. I'm here. I want to do what it takes to help you get to your goal. You're promoted pretty darn fast, provided you get along well with others, you're emotionally intelligent, and you've got the communication skills and the sales skills to sell them. So what do managers want? Well, first, I need to know that my team has the skills for the job I want to hire them for. This is the biggest mistake ever. They have to have the skills in the job I want to hire them for. Now, most people, when I look at the resumes here, I'll get an AWS SysOps, which has nothing to do with architecture. I'll get an AWS DevOps certification, which has nothing to do with architecture. I'll get an AWS developer certification, which again has absolutely nothing to do with architecture. They'll learn Python, they'll learn Bash shell scripting, they'll learn Linux, and they'll learn Terraform. And they show up on an architect job where their job is to design a solution to improve a customer's business performance, and none of that has anything to do with what they do. So you have to be able to do the job. So that is the key skill. You have to have the competency to do this job. And given that we only have a limited amount of time, it has to be focused on the job you desire, the one you want to be best at, not everybody else's. The second thing employers care about is, can they trust you? And how is trust built? By always doing what you say. If you're on a project and you have a deadline, get it done on time. If something comes up that makes it possible, you call that person instantly and let them know the challenge they had, the new date, and see if they have any suggestions to move it forward. They call you at 10 o'clock at night because they're worried about something. Pick up your phone. You're going to be the person that says, I needed someone. I was a little stressed. I reached out to them. This is my trusted person. This is my go-to guy or go-to gal, whatever. That's the case. It's going to be something that's there. And it's really showing your attention to detail, your willingness to get better, showing you're learning things and you're improving. That's really the key. So employers want that. What else do they want in that employee they hire? They're really concerned about your attitude. Do you have a positive attitude? Are you easy to get along with? Are you friendly? Or are you just character? That scares people and it reduces productivity because nobody goes and talks to them. Are you energetic and enthusiastic or excited about the work? If you're not, are you going to be motivated to get better? No. So they're looking for that. Are you going to be able to learn and be better? Not do you have all the skills now, but could you get them? How do you treat others? Are you respectful to others? Do you bring out the best in others? I need that as a hiring manager. I also need to know how you're going to work in a team. Can you support that team? Can you work with people that are different than you? And I'm talking about different in any way. People that think differently. People from different parts of the world. People that have rapidly different educations. People that think in many different ways. Because we need that to a team. Because Alonzo and I, honestly, we could be twins. We think so similar. But you know what? We're not solving any major problems with two people that are nearly identical having the same. Now, Chris in the back, you can make sure that Alonzo and I don't forget stuff because that's his strength. And I got another person, Leo, that's really attentive to technical details, which is needed for things like this. And another guy, Mark, that's over here, that specialty is he's super technical. And we all need that in the group. As it turns out, Mark's from Eastern Europe. I'm from America. Tyrone, who's on this call right, Eddie's in Cameroon. He was in Bamenda. I think he's in Douala right now. And Chow is either in the U.S., Vietnam, goes back and forth, whatever needs to happen. And that's just kind of our lives. So Chow's got a different math skill set, and we need that to truly innovate. So if you have to make it clear that you can work with anyone, whether they be a different religion, a different conservative, liberal, it doesn't matter. And you need that on the team. So there's that. I care about your willingness to go above and beyond. And the last thing I care about is, are you a good team player? Okay, so ran a little late because I really wanted to answer that question for Walking Edits. Tomorrow, we'll have a How to Get Your First Cloud Architect Job webinar, and really come and ask any questions you want. Really come and get down deep. And we'll talk about the role. We'll talk about all the skills. We'll talk about what we do. And you'll be able to ask our team, probably me and Alonzo, since I think we're probably going to be the only two people that have power tomorrow, but we'll see on our team. And Alonzo and I usually do these webinars tomorrow if and when we can. So join us for that. Download this, how to become a cloud architect guide if that's your goal, or how to become an enterprise architect if that's your goal, or how to become an AI architect. It's your goal. Download that free ebook on interviewing. Take advantage of some of these three things. And I look forward to seeing so many of you tomorrow in the webinar. And for my students that are here, can't wait to see you in the next class.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.